In this part, I will give a very brief introduction to Hume's philosophy. The purpose of this part is to give you some context to understand his moral philosophy better. As a modern philosopher, Hume shares a lot of common feature with other modern philosophers. To my understanding, most of modern philosophers they have the concerns for epistemology of philosophy. Basically, they ask questions like how do we have knowledge? How do we form ideas about the external world? And those questions are very significant to Hume. And after his questioning and reflection here, we could see that fundamentally he considers that there are two building blocks of the mind. That is to see, in our human understanding, there are two essential materials. And those materials are the blocks we are going to use to build up our propositions of the external world. Okay, and the two building blocks here, as you can see, the first type are impressions, and the second types here is are ideas. Okay, so according to David Hume, he defined the impressions as a perception which involves actual sensation, such as seeing, feeling, tasting, hearing, touching, and so on. For example, on the right side of the slide, you see a red candle, right? So the redness of the candle is the first impression to it. And also, if you move your finger close to the light of the candle, your finger might have the feeling of burning or hot. Okay, so that is also a very strong impression of the candle here. But ideas, for Hume, ideas are a different type of mental perceptions, which are actually a result of thinking rather than experiencing. So still use the example of the candle here. So you see the redness of this candle. And you remember that 2 days ago you saw a red apple, right? That redness of the apple is similar to the redness of the candle. And also you might have different impressions of other red stuffs. And eventually, after thinking, you have the idea of the redness. So the ideas are the consequences or the results of thinking rather than experiencing. What you are experiencing are impressions. So impressions are very strong and vivid. But for ideas, according to Hume, ideas are much fainter, and usually ideas are not very clear as the impressions. Okay, so we have these two types of fundamental building blocks, and we use these blocks to build up propositions. And according to Hume, all the objects of human reason or inquiry may naturally be divided into two kinds of propositions. That means all the stuffs in your mind, in your thinking, can be clarified into either relations of ideas or matters of fact. So for relations of ideas, Hume considered they actually handle the issues in, for example, geometry, algebra, and arithmetic. For example, if we see that 3 times 5 is equal to 15, right? And Hume considered, so this proposition expresses relations of numbers, okay? But if we see that the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the square of the two other sides, so that is a proposition also expresses relations of ideas. Basically, that expresses relations between the different sides of a right triangle. Okay, so matters of fact are different types of propositions. For example, after you see the right candle, you would see that the candle is red. Okay, so that is a matter of fact. And according to Hume, so there is also the possibility to have a contrary proposition to the matters of fact. Okay, so you could also see that the candle is green or the candle is yellow. So those are propositions concerning matters of fact. You need to combine your experience to see whether that fact is true or not. Okay, but matters of fact are propositions different from relations of ideas. So he would see that all our mental thinking are just two types of propositions here. One is relations of ideas. The other type is matters of fact. I hope the examples helped you to understand the relationship between these two types of propositions, and also the relationship between impressions and ideas. And the next important philosophical question for Hume is the cause-effect connection. He also used a lot of examples to demonstrate the importance of the cause-effect connection. And in the modern period, cause-effect connection is also particularly important to natural science. And the question for Hume to ask about the cause-effect connection is that why do we believe that there is a tie or sort of connection between the cause and effect? Do we observe the cause effect, or there is no such phenomenon of cause and effect we can observe? It is just our mind put this cause-effect connection into the external phenomenon world. So that is a question he is asking. And after a lot of reflection, he would see that it is not logically necessary that a particular effect follows a particular cause. It is the mind. It is the mind. So it is not you see, you observe the cause-effect connection. It is the mind. The mind put this connection to the external world. To give you just one example here, so you see there is a broken glass, right? So you might you might think the cause of this broken glass must be um, someone had dropped this glass earlier sometime. Okay, so this is the cause-effect connection. And for Hume, he would ask you to observe very closely. So if I am going to drop a glass of wine, if I am going to drop a glass of wine, so he's asking you to observe very closely and to describe the phenomenon you actually observed. So he would say that we do experience the spatial continuity. For example, a moment ago, the glass was in my hand. Later, it is on the ground. So there is this spatial difference. And also you see the temporal succession. Okay, we would see 1 second ago the glass is in my hand, and a second later it is broken on the ground. And also you'll see the constant conjunction of cause and effect. So you might see that you observe a moment ago the glass is in my hand, and a moment later it is broken on the ground. And he would say that you can actually all those spatial, temporal, and constant steps, but you cannot observe cause-effect connection. That is to say, here probably even the theory of gravity might help you to understand the cause-effect connection. You might give an explanation to the breaking of the glass. You might say, oh, it's gravity. Gravity caused the glass to be broken and fragile on the ground. And Hume would say, yeah, that is what your mind put in the phenomena. In the phenomena themselves, there is no such thing like a cause and effect. So that is your mind. Put the connections to the external world. So this is the cause-effect connection question for Hume's philosophy. And this question also important for us to understand later his moral philosophy. And after this, I'd like to introduce Hume's predecessors in moral philosophy. So here we could see that you can see from the slide. So in terms of the foundation or the origin of our moral ideas, concepts, and principles, so there are 4 different camps in philosophy. Okay, so the first group of philosophers is what we call rationalists, and philosophers such as Thomas Hobbes and John Locke believe in rationalism. Okay, so rationalists actually believe that we come to an objective moral principle by reasoning. That is to say, formerly we might not have morality, but after we think hard, and also probably self-interest plays a very important role in our thinking, and eventually we calculate our situation and decide to be moral for the benefit of our self-interest. So that is the first group of philosophers. And there is also the second camp here. So these are philosophers who think that we get our moral ideals by divine uh, revelation. That is to say, God actually puts moral ideals and values in our mind. And for some moral theologists, they believe this. And the third camp would announce that we have our morals by conscience or reflection on uh, on our impulses. Philosophers such as Butler believe that conscience exists, and we make our moral judgment based on conscience. For Joseph Butler, he is best known for his criticism of the egoistic, selfish theories associated with Thomas Hobbes and other philosophers who based on their moral theories on self-interest. Sometimes you will find out that it is hard to um, differentiate the second camp and the third because it is very likely that conscience also is divine related. And the last group of philosophers we're talking about, we usually call them sentimentalists, who believe that our moral sense derives from the emotional responsiveness. Um, and the philosophers such as Shaftesbury and Hutchinson, they believe that the foundation of morality is not self-interest, but uh, self-love and our inclination for benevolence. And for those four groups of philosophers, Hume sides with the sentimentalist. He stands with the last group of philosophers. That is to say, we gain our awareness of right and wrong by experiencing the pleasure of approval and the uneasiness of disapproval when we contemplate a character trait or action from an imaginatively sensitive and uh, unbiased point of view. Um, in the next part, I will explain Hume's sentimentalist position in details.